Member Aguilar Medrano.
Here.
Member Berkeley.
Here.
Member Beachside is excused. Member Bienvenu.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Chair Rios.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Guida moves to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Aguilar Madrana seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano.
Yes.
Member Berkeley.
Yes.
Member Bienvenu.
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. We have minutes of April 25th, 2023. Changes to these? Member Bienvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two changes on page 14, the middle of the page. It says Member Bienvenu said the architectural historian's report is informative, but his conclusion isn't something the board would adopt. Add the word necessarily between would and adopt. On page 18, the bottom of the page, where it states Member Bienvenu said he agreed that everything they're doing without relationship to making the house livable, add the word is between doing and without. So it reads they are doing is without relationship to making the house livable. After the comma where it says identifies the designation, replace identifies the with even a. So it reads even a designation as contributing, then strike the words and strike the word and after contributing so that it reads as contributing does not prohibit alterations. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 32, center of the page, Ms. Lamboy said planning was not consulted. The second sentence says there is no need to review in terms of the rail yard design standards. It should read there is a need to review in terms of the rail yard standards. 3 paragraphs down, Chair Rio said they're still searching for a historian for the board. That should read Historic Preservation Division Manager. Yes, Heather.
Member Guida, with reference to the historian for the board, I think we were talking about Flynn Larson's position. So it may be that there was confusion. So just to clarify, we are looking for and have a candidate for the historian position of the board. But we also are looking for a historic preservation manager. The advertisement's closed, but we're going to be starting interviews soon.
Thank you.
Was referring to the position on this board as a historian. Thank you. Anything further? Member Guida?
No,
Madam Chair, just for clarification, so did you want to withdraw that last or just modify it? Just say historian and then your language.
Madam Chair, if that was your intent to ask about the historian for the board, let's leave it as is.
If there are no further changes, is the motion to approve as amended in a second?
Guida moves to approve as amended.
And any seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Hold on one second. Member Berkeley.
Yes.
Member Beachside. I'm sorry, Member Bienvenu.
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
Member Aguilar Medrano.
Abstain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion has been approved.
Melissa, we have 6 findings of fact and conclusions of law. Any changes to any of these? Member Guida.
Just one point of order, Madam Chair. Item number 4 was heard on April 11th, I believe. I was not here and I would not be able to vote on that particular findings of fact and conclusions of law. We could break that one out separately, then we're good.
Fine. Actually, city attorney, a person that was not here for a meeting, I believe that they can vote or they can recuse themselves. Is that correct? If they were not at the meeting, do they abstain?
If he wishes to abstain.
If he wishes to, but they can vote.
I don't think there's anything that says he can't, but
That's what
I understand his
Okay.
position, so.
So if there are no changes, I will ask for a motion excluding 416 a second mother, then we'll do another one for 416 a second mother.
No, sorry, it's 1249 Sarah Gordo, number 4.
1249, okay,
Thank you.
1249, Cerro Gordo. So do I hear a motion? Member
Sure, I'll make a
Bienvenu.
motion. So I move to approve items 1 through 3 and 5 through 6 on the agenda, the findings of fact and conclusions of law. I'll just quickly identify them. 2023-006569 HDRB 1120 East Alameda Street, 2023-006626 HDRB 635A West San Francisco, 2023-006632 HDRB 4166 Osake Madre, 2023-006393 HDRB 303 East Alameda Street, and 2023-006625 HDRB 412 Camino Don Miguel.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Guido will second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Bienvenu,
Yes.
Member Guida,
Yes.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Abstain.
Member Berkeley. The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Now I'll hear another motion in reference to 1249 Cerro Gordo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I now move to approve the findings of fact, conclusions of law as submitted for 2023-006553 HDRB 1249 Cerro Gordo Road.
Do I hear a second?
Aguilar Madrana seconds.
On roll call vote, please.
Member Bienvenu,
Yes.
Member Guida,
Abstain.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley. Yes. Motion has been
Uh,
approved.
Thank you very much. Matters from the public. Anyone here in this room wishing to address the board? No, just anything else, not relating to the upcoming cases. Appears not. Anyone on Zoom?
Yes, Chair Rios, Stephanie Beninato would like to speak. Stephanie, you may unmute.
Thank you very much, Stephanie Beninato. I wanted to point out again, I talked to the city attorney and I've asked her to put in writing what Mr. Rubalid told you last week about 2-1 is somehow a majority of 4. And she, when we were talking, inserted the word voting. I pointed out it's not there. And as lawyers, we should know that we don't insert words into written ordinances that are actually clearly written. So she's going to be putting that in writing for me because I do believe that you are engaged in improper voting. And I really think that it's an incompetent reading of the ordinance. I also want you to know that I did not see any historic board presentations or award ceremony presentations on the agenda for city council tomorrow. Because I thought some members of this board were gonna show up there. And then I also wonder about this ping ponging of, first of all, the text amendment for the exceptions that was here, then it was going to the planning commission. Now suddenly after months, the planning commission's not going to be reviewing it, but somehow it's coming back to the board. This is like the Lucchese sign that was approved with a 2-1 vote with 4 people sitting here, went to the BOA. Both the assistant land use director and the assistant city attorney sat there while the applicant used an improper standard that should only apply to buildings. And then they waited months to even have a meeting, and then it came back here and you voted 2-1 to not allow the exception. So all this ping ponging back and forth, and when is it appropriate to appeal it or not, has all been very nicely obfuscated, in my opinion. And I don't think it helps the public to feel that there is confidence in the process that's being used in the land use department, in particular in these cases that are again being ping-ponged around with for who knows what reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else? No one else?
Chair Rios.
Anything from staff?
Yes, just one moment. I'm going to share my screen. First of all, the hope was that we would be heard at tomorrow's May 10th governing body meeting regarding the Heritage Preservation Awards. There is a ceremony that's scheduled for the 18th of May. And I also wanted to highlight the great work of the community in front of the city council. Because of the budget hearing and all of that, that's been pushed to May 31st. So it would be sort of a retrospective of Heritage Preservation Month, but it's also still going to be a great opportunity to highlight the great work of folks in the community. We have a lot of passionate members of our community. I know this is hard to read, so I'm going to read it. The mayor did sign a proclamation, which will be read at both the Heritage Awards ceremony as well as in front of the city council on the 31st. Whereas the Santa Fe recognizes the benefits of the preservation of its archaeological and historic resources, and whereas the Santa Fe is a diverse and inclusive community, and whereas Santa Fe's unique sense of place is deeply rooted in its history, and whereas Santa Fe is a place of cultural confluence in the past as it is in the present, and whereas the city of Santa Fe takes pride in the culture and history that makes our community exceptional, and whereas historic preservation in the city different is essential to sustaining our community character and well-being, and whereas the city of Santa Fe supports its community and community partners in celebrating our heritage, and whereas people saving places is the theme of this year's National Historic Preservation Month. Now, therefore, I, Alan M. Weber, Mayor of the City of Santa Fe, New Mexico, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2023 as Historic Preservation Month here within the City of Santa Fe. So look forward to hopefully folks who are watching this will join us on May 18th at the San Miguel Chapel for the awards ceremony. And then also you'll have an opportunity to catch who might be getting awards at the May 31st City Council hearing at the beginning of the agenda.
Thank you, Heather. Anything else?
And no other communications at this time. Thank
Very
you.
much. We have nothing under old business, but we have 6 cases under new business. But I do need to tell you a couple of things, and that is I will limit public speakers to 2 minutes. I think that's plenty of time to say what you want to say. And if I feel like the 2 minutes are up and Melissa will help me with this, and you need to finish your thought, I will let you finish your thought. Okay. And also, if you disagree with the decision that this board renders this evening, you do have the option to appeal to the city council, and you'd have 15 days, up to 50 days after the findings and conclusions have been approved. Thank you very much. And all the cases this evening will be presented by Heather. Correct, Heather? And the first case is located at 128 South Capitol Street. Please, Heather.
Thank you, Chair Rios, members of the board. So with reference to status, I would just sort of like to provide an overview regarding the legislative context and regulatory context. I did refer to section of the code that applies to new construction and demolition and the staff report. What we're hearing tonight relates to status. And so it is the Historic Districts Review Board whole jurisdiction in determining the status of the structures. So it's not a special process like what may happen if there's a demolition request or a new construction request. So it's a little bit different from what we did at NMSA, the School of the Arts. That was for new construction. There was no demolition request and no existing historic building on that particular site. So this evening, we'll be considering status of all the buildings that are listed on the agenda. So with reference to the location of the subject building, the Concha Ortiz y Pino building, it's item number 7 on that key map. There's also two other structures on the site related to the Ortiz y Pino building, and that includes the Long Fleet building, which is just to the left of number 7 building. And then the number 9 represents a garage. So if it pleases the board, I would like to present both of these cases in together, since they do relate to one another, and would remind the board that there would be 2 motions necessary to address each case. Is that the pleasure of the board?
That's fine.
Thank you. So I would like to sort of, provide a little bit of heritage, or I'm sorry, provide a little bit of background on the historic development of this area. This building represents changes that happened after the Baton Memorial, what is now Baton Memorial Building, was being renovated, and the desire for a new Capitol building was needed because of the space needs of the legislature, as well as the other offices within the state government administration. The area that we're talking about is highlighted with the yellow circle there, and you can see that it had a traditional Anglo-American development pattern. Before Paseo de Peralta cut this area off from the Don Gaspar area, it really was an extension of the Don Gaspar, what is now the Don Gaspar neighborhood. This, however, is located in the downtown and east side historic district. And you can see that pattern across Don Gaspar Avenue in terms of the more regulated lot pattern. And but whereas in the context of the rest of the area, the Barrio del Naco is adjacent to the Santa Fe River. A lot of that was removed during the time that the campus was developed. The governor's mansion was also located near the Santa Fe River. So this map is from 1930, and is a Sanborn map illustrating that there were several bungalows located on the site. This is a 1958 aerial, and the site had not been developed yet. And I'm sorry if it's sort of hard to read. I should have zoomed in a little bit more, but you can see the bungalows that were illustrated on the Sanborn map still in place. There also was agricultural area that is immediately to the south, sort of more of the traditional Hispanic development pattern. This was owned by the Ortiz family prior to the movement of the capital to this location. This is a 1969 aerial, and you can see between 1958 and 1969, there's been a lot of change in the area, and that includes the demolition of a lot of those the bungalows that were on the block, sort of the reconfiguring of the entire block, so that it becomes primarily institutional instead of residential. On our subsequent cases, we'll be considering the bungalows that are but Don Gaspar Avenue, but this particular case deals with the L-shaped building. The building that sort of looks like a U is no longer there. There's just parking at this point. So in 1969, the Fleet building had been built, but just barely built. And then and then subsequent to that was the garage structure that was built. So this was known as the New Mexico Education Building when it was being conceived, and it was constructed for the education department. These are some from the original drawings that William Kruger did, who designed a lot of buildings in Los Alamos and was raised in Raton, and did a lot of work also in northern New Mexico. You can see the 3 bungalows that were demolished in order to build this building here at the site. And originally the site only included the building site, including that courtyard area, but really didn't include the entire site as one sees it today. The architecture is an interpretation of territorial style with modernism, and it therefore really does not relate to the rest of the state complex relative to the different style of buildings. Unfortunately, the state complex doesn't really have a cohesive campus feel like other state complexes. In part, that has to do with the fact that the Capitol was renovated and then there was a desire for a new Capitol. Ours is, which is the third youngest Capitol in the country. So the building, as it was designed by Kruger, almost feels like it was left over. And it was that he was focused on the design of the Capitol building, for which he was the architect. And that was happening somewhat concurrently. So the building was built in 1961, and there were 3 bungalows demolished. As I discussed before, you can see the traditional territorial coping. There are also, the patterns of windows that are common to modernist style. And also inclusive of that is the sort of long stepping, strands of building with some stepping for a second story. Furthermore, there is the courtyard that was referred to, and there are some design elements that are from that time frame, and you can see the decorative wall with the inserts that one would find typically during that era. So staff recommends for 130 South Capitol, which is the New Mexico Education Building that is changed now. There are other agencies in that location. It doesn't embody the character of the of a type of construction. It is sort of a mixture of territorial revival style and the modernist movement. And so therefore, it's also divergent from the character of other buildings on the state campus. And it does not contribute to the overall character of the district, in the opinion of staff. Moving on to the Fleet Building, it was built by 1969 and is also a territorial revival style, has more of the massing that's typically found with territorial revival style, and has, different architectural treatments that really have better reference to the style itself. But in the opinion of staff, the recommendation is that it remain non-contributing. It does not help to establish or maintain the character of the district. And although it has a historic association with the Kruger, it was not his only building on the state campus. And staff recommends that the non-contributing designation be retained. And finally, with reference to the garage, it's really utilitarian in nature, constructed of a concrete mason unit with roll-up doors, and there's no true articulation of any sort. So it does not help to establish or maintain the character of the district. And there is no distinct historic character. And so staff recommends retaining that non-contributing status designation. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for Heather at this moment? Just none. Will the applicant or applicants come forward and get sworn in?
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record. Let me just get this. Didn't hear.
Good evening, Chair Rios, board members. I'm Jennifer Jenkins here this evening on behalf of the state of New Mexico in request for the status review applications that are before you this evening. I'm going to kind of start, since this is kind of the beginning of our process this evening, I'm going to start with a little bit of context and some overview. And then
Hold on, can everybody in the back hear her? No, they cannot. So if you'll speak, just pull that mic out of there, just
a
right
little
in.
bit. Is that better?
And if you speak this evening, don't be afraid to speak right into
Okay.
that mic so we can all hear you.
It's rare that nobody can hear me, so I'm
Yeah.
not accustomed to, okay. So as Heather mentioned at the beginning of her remarks, just providing the identifying the regulations under which decisions are being made this evening. Status review requests, as I believe you know, are subject to section 14-5.2 C2 regarding the designation of significant contributing and non-contributing status within the historic districts, as well as the definitions in 14-12. With respect to state capital outlay projects, there is as you're aware also, there are very specific provisions that relate to state capital outlay. and that are in section M of the historic overlay provisions. However, section M only applies to new structures, additions, alterations, or demolition. So tonight, we are not necessarily the state of New Mexico. We are any property owner within any historic district. We are subject to the same status review criteria that would apply to any other structure in the districts. So I did part of this for my own edification in terms of refreshing my memory about the various definitions that govern how status is designated. Obviously, we have non-contributing, and we do concur with staff's recommendation with respect to the structures at 128 and 130 South Capitol. Contributing specifically says adds to the historic associations or historic architectural design qualities that are significant for a district. Downtown East Side District is the district we're talking about this evening. A significant structure, of course, is a much higher bar, embodies distinctive characteristics of a type and period and method of construction. And then also at the end, it can be designated, a structure can be designated significant for its association with events or persons that are important on a local, regional, national, or global level, or it is listed or eligibly listed on the state register of historic cultural properties. So what is going to be important tonight is that this board make positive, explicit findings with respect to how the board's decisions comply with these definitions. This is our baseline. These are the metrics that the code designates must be followed with any status designation with respect to the district in which the buildings are located. So this is a map of generally of the state capitol campus. Whoops, I went one too far. And so we have the state capitol here. Just directly to the west is the subject property here with the Don Gaspar Casitas and the buildings at 128 and 130. This is the newish state parking garage I think everybody's familiar with. And then, of course, we have Bataan and Viagra and all the various, and then Para, all the various state capitol complex buildings in the vicinity. So as we mentioned, the subject property that is pointed out right here is on the far west edge of the downtown and east side historic district and just directly north of the Don Gaspar historic district. So zooming in, you can see the site here, and these are the subject buildings. And then this is a great aerial that you can really see the existing conditions, Concha E. Ortiz, the Fleet building and the little maintenance garage, and then the casitas here to the east. So in 2012, and I believe this was covered pretty thoroughly in your staff report, these buildings received a status review. And but we are back before you to, we are requesting downgrade in status. But we know that this board has the right to request a status review at any time. So we thought, let's just take care of it. So we went ahead and proactively submitted applications for review. So in 2012, the historic board designated the buildings on South Capitol that we were discussing as non-contributing, and staff is recommending that designation be maintained, and we concur with that. And the casitas on Don Gaspar, the structures themselves were designated as significant, with the garages that are associated designated as contributing. So this is our starting point for the discussion this evening. So in 2012, when the buildings were reviewed at that time, staff noted that the surrounding area, of course, had undergone substantial changes, which Heather touched on. And this was no longer a vestige of a residential neighborhood. This is a state capitol complex of institutional government buildings. That is how the area has evolved. And they also noted that the residents and garages on Don Gaspar were more associated with the Don Gaspar Historic District, as Heather pointed out, until such time as Posada Peralta created that, that separation, if you will, for this particular parcel. And over the years, several studies commissioned by the city have recommended the creation of a capital complex historic district to really acknowledge the unique nature of this particular area of downtown, the unique nature of its history and the unique nature of its purpose. And so that has been recommended in, like I said, in a variety of studies examining the city's historic provisions. So these structures, they bear little relationship in character, development pattern, or historic significance of the downtown and East Side Historic District. We have to keep reminding ourselves that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about what contributes to that specific district. And because of the fact that they bear little relationship, they do not, quote unquote, establish and maintain the character of that district per the definition of contributing. And as I mentioned, multiple city studies have highlighted the unique character of each of the city's multiple historic neighborhoods and districts and underscore the need for historic status to be tied to the unique characteristics and significance of the historic district in which those buildings are situated. And this is a sampling. There was a study in 77, Design and Preservation in Santa Fe, a pluralistic approach. There was a Don Gaspar Architectural Historic Survey in 83. In 88, there was a Santa Fe Historic Neighborhood Study. In 89, an evaluation of Santa Fe Historic Significance. And in 2021, most recently, Continuity and Connection, a pre-planning report on the state of historic preservation in Santa Fe. And so what each of these studies in their own way highlighted is the need, if we have independent separate districts, they're different for a reason. They're different for a reason. So when we are talking about status, we need to be looking through the lens of what are the unique characters of that district. So I've already kind of touched on 128 and 130. I have a lot of images that I'd be happy to go through, but I will just, I will leave it here and just state that we do concur with staff's recommendation with respect to 3 buildings in this location.
Ms. Jenkins, board members, do you have any questions or do you have any comments at this time in reference to what Ms. Jenkins just told us? We will hear from the public in reference to these 2 cases. Anyone from the public wishing to come and comment in reference to these 2 cases? 128 South Capitol and 130 South Capitol. Doesn't appear like there comes someone. You will need to get sworn in, sir.
Members of the board, my name is Mark Bertram. I'm a.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Now please state your name and address.
Mark Bertram. I live at 906 Trail Cross Court here in Santa Fe. And I'm not accustomed to, I guess I'm normally trying to bring a development forward before this board, so I'm in a little bit different position today. I think what's important is to keep in some sort of context here what the demolition of these buildings will ultimately provide. And that is a massive 200,000 square foot office building with a 3-story parking structure. That would be roughly the equivalent size of the state capitol.
Mr. Bertram, I'm going to interrupt you because this evening we are simply reviewing
The status, I
evaluating
understand
the
that.
status.
That is the first step to allowing the state to demolish the buildings, to allow this project to go forward.
Demolition is not before us this evening either. This is
Right.
just a status review, but you are welcome to come back and stand at that podium when those issues will be heard before the board and state your opinion. But this evening, we are looking just at the status review. If you
All right.
have anything to say to what Ms. Jenkins said or to what
Well,
Heather said. you are
well,
welcome.
first of all, I commend you all for reading that packet. I mean, 1,800 pages is quite a bit to absorb. But she did cite all these studies over the years that I think kind of point to the fact that these buildings are probably more historic than the state would like us to believe. Just because they don't fit in with a master plan. I mean, I'm in the development business. If we brought this forward to try to change the status and downgrade the status of a project just to make it more convenient for ultimate development of it, we'd be laughed out of here. We wouldn't even try it. So I just hope you keep some of that in mind, and at the appropriate time, I will be back. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bertram.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is John Eddy. My address is number 14. Avenida Campo Verde, Santa Fe, 87506. Madam Chair, board members, I have mixed feelings about these buildings and on many different levels. Aesthetically, I don't really appreciate these buildings very much. And but what is interesting and important about these buildings is that the fact that William Kruger, I believe, designed them all. I think that's clear. Kruger was a very important and rather interesting architect in town in that he really pushed for modernization and a move from territorial and the established norms in going with more modern buildings in Santa Fe with some very wonderful success. There are some really beautiful buildings that Kruger did in town. These are not exemplary of what Kruger was capable of doing, unfortunately, but the association remains. So for the context of this large property, there is the importance as I see it in viewing these particular buildings. That's all really I can say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eddy.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Randall Bell, 291 Viaje Pavo Real, Santa Fe. So I was unaware that this was going to be a hearing on the status. I had been told that this was a hearing for explaining the process going forward on what the state wants to do. So anyway, having said that, I really understand where Mr. Bertram's concern is, which is this may not be the hearing for demolition, but the hearing of status is the prelude to the demolition. So I think it's important that the board take a very close look at these buildings, their history, their design. I believe Ms. Lamboy emphasized that the campus, the government campus, does not in fact have really a coherent design theme, and in fact that's true. I think what Mr. Eddy just noted is Mr. Kruger had an important role in this blending of modernism with territorial aspects. You may not think they're particularly distinguished buildings that he's done, but they are an important part of the history of Santa Fe. And I believe the education building is in fact over 50 years old. And because of that, really needs a careful look before it is, to me, it should be presumptively considered contributing. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Anyone else?
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Madam Chair. This is David Rash, 21 Altura Road, Santa Fe. It was interesting that the staff recommended non-contributing, but you definitely saw that the modernist and territorial blend makes this building quite interesting. How many other buildings that blend modernism with territorial revival have we preserved in town? I can certainly talk about the casitas, but that case isn't up for tonight. But in my imagination, the building on the corner of Palace and Grant, the Bochum building, is another good example of modern territorial structure. So I would definitely recommend against non-contributing status for that building. It's got such integrity and it does represent that evolution of the territorial style into the mid-century. And I think now 1973 is considered historic. So this one is quite old and has integrity. So I would recommend at least contributing, if not significant. But it's a fabulous building and should be preserved. Thank you.
Mr. Rash, before you leave, are you talking about both buildings? We're looking at
Just the
both-
Concha Ortiz
Just the
building.
Concha Ortiz.
Garage and the other long linear one, I don't think they deserve any status. Non-contributing.
Thank you, Mr. Rash. And it's nice seeing you.
Too.
Used to be part of city staff for many years. Board members, do you have? Yes, yeah.
Richard Martinez would like to speak.
Okay.
Richard, you may unmute. Remember to state your name and address for the record. Richard, if you're trying to speak, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll go ahead
Richard,
and swear you in, Richard. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Richard Martinez, 1524 Paseo de Peralta. The Concha and Ortiz building represents a very important part of the history of Santa Fe. This effort to blend the modern and the territorial, I would argue, defines the Santa Fe style. It is very important. In a way, I would say that the buildings, the little bungalows along Don Gaspar, while they're cute, they're out of place. This building is not out of place. It is where it was intended to be. It is of the scale that it was intended to be, and it has not lost the context around it. And so I would urge that the Concha Ortiz building be maintained as contributing or be upgraded to contributing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Anyone else on Zoom?
Yes, Chair Rios. Gayla Bechtel is on Zoom. Gayla, don't forget to state your name and address for the record and be sworn.
Good evening, Gayla Bechtel, 1813 Hano Road.
Thank you. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
I would like to also weigh in on the Concha Ortiz building is a contributing building to our Santa Fe style as we understand it. The modernist pieces with the territorial elements have been used and were used by John Gamim, later by, it's actually Willard Kruger, not William Kruger, I found out as I was doing the Higbee. So that should probably be corrected. But the territorial style, reflects the Baton Memorial building. It reflects the Agra building. It reflects the state capitol building. So I agree with Richard's statement that it's exactly where it needs to be. Yes, it does not contribute to the downtown East Side historic district. And so I don't know if the state capitol complex needs to be its own historic district now that those buildings are actually historic. So it seems a technicality, which, we certainly live by our technical language, that it's not contributing to the downtown East Side, but it does contribute to what we now have as the state complex building. I mean, when they carved out the Barrio Donaco historic district, it was a carve out of what the state capitol had already overtaken. the buildings that were demolished over the years to make way for the state capitol office buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayla. Anyone else?
Yes, Chair. Stephanie Beninatto would like to speak. Stephanie, please remember to state your name and address and be sworn.
Yeah, thank you. Stephanie Beninatto, PO Box 1601, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Thank you. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
I would agree with the speakers before me about the need to upgrade the Concha Ortiz y Pino building to contributing. I understand from Ms. Jenkins' argument that it doesn't fit into the larger downtown, but it does fit into what basically is a state complex that I think we all have acknowledged for quite some time. And there is no actual, well, there's a sort of unity in the use of territorial style in these buildings, but there really is no plan or architectural unity beyond that use of territorial. And I do think this building represents a point in time by a local architect who is prominent. And I think it deserves contributing status. And I actually think the same thing of the Casitas, but I'll talk about that when that case comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else? Anyone else? It looks like Ms. Jenkins wants to say something. You
Yes,
have the floor.
thank you. Thank you, Chair Rios. So Ms. Bechtold is the historian. I know everybody is familiar with her and her work and her esteemed career in Santa Fe. That is why she was engaged to prepare the historic reports that are in your packet for each of the structures that are being reviewed tonight. Most important thing that Ms. Bechtold said is that this building does not contribute to the downtown and east side district. Full stop. That is the standard that this body is required to comply with per the provisions of the code. There does not seem to be much disagreement in that regard. This building does not contribute to the downtown and east side district. Thank you.
I need a clarification from you, Heather, or the attorney. Am I correct in stating that district standards should not be considered this evening, only harmony that has to do with the materials, the color, the proportion of the buildings? Is this building in harmony with the other buildings? Is that correct?
Chair Rios, thank you. I was going to actually ask to speak on that issue. So if there is a new building being proposed or an existing building being remodeled, those downtown and east side standards do apply. But in this particular case, we're considering status. So as a general harmony to style, and I might remind the board about other buildings in our city that don't necessarily comply with design standards, but have historic merits in their own right. There throughout the city, including the Capitol building and including other other buildings like at I'm blanking right now. So, but plenty of them. So
Like the Masonic Temple.
Yes, Masonic Temple. Thank you very much. So, and that's an important fact to remember. Also, the downtown east side standard boundaries were drawn at a time where it was 1957. There were, some references to the Down Gaspar historic area, but those buildings weren't historic at that time. However, the Ortiz family and other native New Mexican families owned land in that area. And there's a Spanish colonial site actually under the building that through archaeological investigations has been discovered. So at the time that the downtown and east side district was established, is likely that may have been the thought process, just for a point of reference.
And if I may, Chair, thank you for indulging me. Just to clarify, because I want to make sure that I'm really clear. The reference to consideration of general harmony relates to section M that relates to capital outlay. That is not the section that is governing this deliberation this evening. We are treating the status review like any other status review where this body has to make positive findings about how the structures contribute to the downtown and east side historic district. So this is not just an overarching harmony decision, because that is not applicable to these deliberations. That will be applicable, section M, with respect to state capital outlay at future proceedings. It is not applicable tonight.
Thank you. Clarification, please, from the city attorney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The definition of contributing structure from the code is a structure located in a historic district approximately 50 years old or older that helps to establish and maintain the character of that historic district. Although a contributing structure is not unique in itself, it adds to the historic associations or historic architectural design qualities that are significant for a district. The contributing structure may have had minor alterations, but its integrity remains. And I think it would be helpful to hear the definition of a significant structure. And I can only pull up one at a time, so I can have just a moment here. Significant structure reads, a structure located in a historic district that is approximately 50 years old or older, and that embodies distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. For a structure to be designated as significant, it must retain a high level of historic integrity. A structure may be designated as significant, A, for its association with events or persons that are important on a local, regional, national, or global level, or B, if it is listed on or is eligible to be listed on the State Register of Cultural Properties or the National Register of Historic Places.
And if I may, since we're reading all the definitions, I'll read non-contributing structure just to round it out. And that is a structure located in an H district that is less than 50 years old or that does not exhibit sufficient historic integrity to establish and maintain the character of the H district. And remember, character doesn't mean what is expected in the downtown and east side historic district as predominant, but it is an overall character of the district that's being referred to.
Thank you, Heather. Yes, Member Benvenue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just broad thoughts. I think that this last discussion is really focusing to a point the issues that are going to decide this matter. It really is, to me, a dispute over what it means to contribute to an historic district. So the applicants rightfully pointed that out as clearly laid out in our ordinance as being what we need to decide. However, I would disagree, I think, with the applicant is I don't believe that the character of this historic district in particular, and some of the others as well, is necessarily uniform. And it's not to be equated to the style standards that are set forth in the ordinance for that district. I think it's clear that the downtown East Side district encompasses multiple historic neighborhoods and streetscapes that are not necessarily the same throughout the district. We would all recognize the plaza as a very distinctive area within the historic district. We would recognize Palace as being quite different than that, but yet very important part of the district. There's the Acequia Madre district, which is significant for its revival buildings built at a later date. There's the Canyon neighborhood in Cerro Gordo, which is agricultural. I think that we see that there are many different sub-districts, even if the code has not been amended to delineate them. So in this case, to me, I agree that there is a sub-district at this point, tacitly, which is this Capitol complex. And that's why I see it's good that we put these two cases together and separate from the other four cases, because I see them quite differently. We'll get to the other four later, but I think a very good argument is to be made there that they're no longer really characteristic or contributing to this sub-district of the capital. This building, though, on the other hand, seems very, very much to contribute now that it's become historic, because it was purposefully built in order to be a state office building added to the campus. And in fact, residential structures were demolished in order to make way for it. So that particular structure, I think, clearly does relate to the history of this sub-district of the capital. And, I think we could dispute perhaps whether we individually aesthetically think it's, a beautiful building. Regardless of that, it seems very characteristic of a moment in time when there was this effort to combine modernist elements with territorial traditional style that we don't have a lot of examples of, but this was a state building, so naturally they were permitted to be more experimental than we would see elsewhere. So when I look at that particular building, I do think that it contributes to the downtown and east side district as a contribution to the Capitol complex. So for that reason, I would agree to upgrade it to contributing. The other bit, the very, very small building and garage, I don't think reach that level because I think they're highly utilitarian.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else wishing to comment at this time? Member Guida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Contrary to popular opinion, I don't think we do preservation particularly well in Santa Fe. We have, an ordinance that started as a style ordinance, and then preservation was kind of overlaid into it when districts began to be nominated in the 80s and in years afterwards. This whole notion of significant contributing, non-contributing buildings, only emerged in our ordinance in the early 90s. This board only began ruling on status designations in 2004. So in light of Santa Fe's, the Santa Fe style kind of being formed in 1912, the ordinance being written in 1957, this discussion of contributing status is actually a relatively new one. Our ordinance, it's quite well known, doesn't really kind of follow very closely or closely enough the national standards for historic preservation. And so we have some kind of funny gaps that we contend with over and over again when this board reviews historic status cases. One of those was highlighted tonight and was highlighted actually 2 weeks ago when we were looking at another status case. We don't have statements of significance or periods of significance that are associated with the historic districts as designated. I think Member Benvenu is correct. The downtown and east side historic district is a heterogeneous district. And I certainly recognize it as such, and I think there's a lot of merit to that opinion. It's just not something that's characterized in our ordinance. And so it becomes a conundrum to really say, well, this building is contributing because of its contribution to a particular period, a particular moment in time or movement, or those things that we kind of regularly see when we talk about National Register buildings or we deal with Department of Interior standards. Those guideposts are not in place. And so conversations have become a bit rudderless the way that they did last week. We feel it's old, so therefore it's important, or vernacular is important. And it's not to diminish those points of view. It's just that we as a community haven't decided very clearly on what's important to us in terms of values of preservation, which periods are important. And for me, I'm really troubled by the notion that something is, would be important just because it's old. That's not enough of a standard for preservation. And that's recognized very well outside of Santa Fe. So this is a bit of a conundrum. I think, the board has in the past made status designations that have gone beyond or beyond what's not stated in the code, those periods of significance, those stats, and made a rationale for nominating a building such as this as contributing. I think there's a lot of merit to the notion that this capital district is recognizable. I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that this building actually was done by an important Santa Fe regional modernist. I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that this is an interpretation of Santa Fe style that came after 1912 and even came after our ordinance and is therefore important. I think its style does relate to the rest of the campus of Capitol buildings. I don't think it's a particularly well-designed campus, but style-wise, this building does have certainly some integrity in terms of the interpretation of territorial style and some congruity with the other modern territorial style buildings that we see in the state campus. For that reason, I would support in concept an upgrade of contributing to this particular building. And by that, I mean just the Country Ortiz building. I'll just say one more thing on this, and it's related to the statusing of buildings. And I think that another gap that was kind of teased out early in the public comments tonight is this pretense that when we status buildings, we don't think about future development, that we don't think about demolition, that we don't think about, preservation is just that. It's an act of preserving. And I think because our standards are so ill-defined, and I think because this board sees status designation as a tool to prevent other types of development, most often out of fear of what's not known, I think that's a real problem. And I certainly empathize with the comments that were presented at the beginning of public comment, that it's a bit silly to talk about this project without talking about what comes next. To me, preservation is not an absolute. It's not archaeology. It's not everything in the ground under the old outhouse is valuable and therefore worth keeping. It's relative to our current values. It's relative to our needs for housing. It's relative to our needs for what we want to become as a city. And so to kind of do these exercises in a vacuum or even pretend that they are completely distinct and separate from each other is a bit silly in my mind. I don't support the idea that we would designate a building to prevent further development or status of buildings to prevent further development. But I know it's a reality. And I would hope, in this case, we could at least be objective about the building in and of itself as much as is possible. That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Board members, if there is nothing further, I will entertain a motion in reference to case 128 South Capitol. Yes, Member Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make a motion. In case number 2023-006708, HDRB 128 South Capitol Street, I move that findings be entered that this building is more than 50 years old and helps to establish and maintain the character of the downtown and east side district, specifically the portion of that district that is encompassed by the state capital property. And for that reason, would move that the status be upgraded to contributing.
I'm going to interrupt you. This is the 128. This is not the Concha Ortiz building.
Okay,
The 130 is the Concha Ortiz.
my mistake.
So,
The 128 South Capitol.
you want to
move-
restate that motion?
Sure, 2023-006708 HDRB 128 South Capitol Street. Move based on the record as presented and the recommendation of staff that the status be maintained as non-contributing.
Is there a second to this motion?
Aguilar Madrano seconds.
Is there anything further to add? Nothing further. Roll call vote, please.
Member Guida,
Yes.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Now we can move
I
on.
will try again on 130 South Capitol Street, 2023-006709 HDRB. For the reasons previously stated, move that those findings of fact be entered and that the status be upgraded to contributing.
Is there a second to this motion?
Berkeley seconds.
Nothing further to add? Nothing further? Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. We will move on to 402 Don Gaspar Avenue. Heather.
Thank you, Chair Rios. I was just making sure I had all my windows correct, so that everybody can see the right thing. So although I'll present the background information with reference to 402 Don Gaspar, 406, 410, and 414 Don Gaspar, I will stop and pause at each building. So we'll consider 402 first. I'll pause. I'll let Ms. Jenkins give her presentation and we have comment on that particular building. And then we can continue. I won't, do all the background material for the next subsequent buildings, but I just want to make sure that we give each building its due, in other words. So there will be ultimately 4 motions, but we'll separate this hearing different from the last consideration of the building at 128, buildings at 128 and 130 South Capitol. So as was alluded to in some of the public comments, these buildings are 4 buildings that were built in the traditional Anglo-American style, and they're bungalows. And so, as you know, a bungalow is very much an Anglo-American feature, but once again, they do reflect sort of the city difference in our history. So I'm going to go back quite a ways in order to understand how the city changed over time. In 1892, a map was drafted and it showed the footprint of the Capitol building, as there was a Capitol building that was built originally prior to the Baton Memorial Building that's encased right now that burned. And so this represents that first Capitol. And you can see the overall urban pattern here. The difference being between the downtown and east side with the long linear lots associated with those lots around the plaza. And then the sort of irregular street network. Of course, Water Street was named for a specific reason, in that there was a stream going down Water Street. And so a lot of those things that hadn't happened yet, you can see that the design or the urban layout was completely different, and also influenced by the property owners like the Sisters of Loretto, which they had a large tract there. Crossing the river, the Barrio de Anaco figured prominently in Santa Fe's history, representing some of the earliest settlement in the Santa Fe area. The term Anauco is an indigenous and Native American term, and reflected that a lot of its citizens were of Native American descent and weren't part of the central core necessarily, and lived on the edge. So, and additionally, to the south of the Capitol, before the sort of importing those state functions into this neighborhood, there were also large lot development. The Ortiz family originally owned this land, and it was used for agricultural purposes. Moving forward to 1912 and the 1912 King's map. Once again, this neighborhood was not divided from Don Gaspar. In fact, it was very much a reflection with that the state capitol and the governor's mansion being sort of the dividing line, as it were, between the Barrio Anauco, which is the more traditional downtown east side, Spanish Pueblo revival, and the territorial revival style buildings. Or even some of those like the oldest house, which were just pretty much Spanish Pueblo design and not necessarily a revival. So the lot or the block was developed in more of an American way, Anglo-American way, in which there were consistent lot sizes, and there was an alley in the Collingwood addition that is to the east, which, that was also found in Anglo-American layouts, lot layouts. And so by 1912, there were 6 bungalows located immediately across from the state capitol, probably representing the need for housing proximate to this new function in this neighborhood. In 1921, the Sanborn map illustrates that those bungalows are still extant. Also, by 1921, the First Baptist Church, I mentioned Presbyterian on our site visit today. I was wrong. The First Baptist Church was constructed there at the corner of what was Manhattan Avenue, now is Paseo Peralta. And then 2 bungalows were also in that place. The bungalows that we're going to be discussing tonight are represented further to the north, and were built by 3 of them by 1930. And so what's unique about these bungalows is that, urban planners these days really try to create neighborhoods that have character. And I think we've learned from the suburbs of, having the same house over and over again is not good urban design. So these are 3 identical footprints, but the person who designed these houses actually was thoughtful and intentional and not making them look the same. And you'll see that in the photographs. And so it represents sort of a unique vision, not only associated with the style, but also the design and what was being implemented at that time to make a diverse and unique neighborhood. So by 1958, you can see that there was one building that was built to the west of the bungalows themselves. The bungalows are located in about Don Gaspar Avenue. The Capitol building was not there, but you can see it's a more Anglo-American development. To the north, abutting the Santa Fe River, there was the Barrio del Naco with a sort of very close, almost attached buildings, and in some places attached, that were more, consistent with what we find in the downtown and east side historic district. So at that point, it communicates to me that due to the separation of the uses, this portion really related to the Don Gaspar area. But then Paseo Peralta happened and was constructed by 1969. And so at this point, you can see the bungalows that are in place, but of course, along Don Gaspar, the subject bungalows that we're speaking about, but the rest of the block was redeveloped at that time. And of course, the Capitol building was built by that time as well. This is a photograph of the buildings themselves. You can see the identical footprints by the buildings number 2 through 5. There's the 2 extra buildings that were demolished previous to the ownership of the state, basically in 1999, as well as the church that was previously there, that First Baptist Church at the top of the photograph. The first building that we'll be considering tonight as part of our discussion, the first bungalow, is something that's somewhat unique. And it was built by 1948. It was not built concurrent to these 3 bungalows. So, and what's unique also about this building at 402 Don Gaspar is that it is a duplex. So it diverged from the other bungalows in its use or functionality. And it could represent changing housing needs because of the people that were associated with the state capital and the need for, housing for associated with the state capital, and to also represent the diversity of housing affordability as well. A duplex offered an opportunity to have a more affordable type of living scenario. All these buildings do have basements, including this one as well. So there was livable space subgrade as well as at grade. And I will note on this building, and you can see the two different units here on the back side of the building. I will note that the state has not complied with the city's minimum maintenance standards as set forth in the code. And so this building is not in great shape. But if there is a request for a demolition to come forward on this and the other buildings, then we will do a structural analysis to really understand the shape, because it's something to just look at it from the street and see that the stucco is cracking and the paint is peeling, but another thing to really do an in-depth analysis. So at the time, back in 2012, the then Historic Districts Review Board designated this as significant. The minutes are in your packet. And staff agrees that it should remain as significant and embodies the characteristics of a type of housing utilizing the pentile construction, which was strongly tied to an era in Santa Fe where the penitentiary actually created those bricks, made those bricks, and are reflected throughout and sprinkled throughout the town through the city and the historic districts. And there was a need for housing adjacent to the Capitol building. It retains a high level of historic integrity. There's been no change to the footprint, and it retains a lot of the historic fabric, including windows. And then it also represents a part of the evolution of Santa Fe's urban character. Some may say that these bungalows are out of place, but they are also part of what tells the story of our city with urban renewal that happened in the 1960s. Finally referred to by preservationists as urban removal. In that case, there was a lot of impact to predominantly agricultural lands in this area. But, there are other areas, including the Barrio del Nauco, that were radically impacted by the state's expansion. And so we need to be mindful of the story of not only the history of the city and its growth, but also the history of the city and its change and removal of historic structures. So this may be a remnant that's related to the Don Gaspar Historic District within the downtown and east side, but it's an important remnant nonetheless. So staff recommends retaining that significant designation for the residents. With reference to the garage structure, it was designated as contributing in the 2012 hearings. Staff does not feel like it exemplifies any type of, or does not overall contribute to the character of the district. They're not exemplary in terms of a specific architectural style or character. And so staff does recommend downgrading the garage to the non-contributing status. And that concludes the presentation for 402. Don Gaspar.
Thank you. Any clarification questions for Heather at this time? Board members? Yes. Member Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Heather, not to play 20 questions with you. In 2012, when these were designated as, the bungalows were designated as significant, the garages as contributing, what were the initial staff recommendations at that time?
Chair, Member Guida, I might have to double check, but I believe it was contributing, but I will ascertain that.
Okay. The reason I ask is just because it seems, I mean, it's like, it seems unlikely that this board would designate these examples as significant in any other context. I could see a case being made for contributing perhaps to a district, and we've already had a discussion tonight about what or what isn't a district. But significant seemed like when I noticed that the board voted for it and I saw so little board discussion to kind of really underpin that significant designation where all facades are primary and they're kind of usually, buildings that are exceptional examples or that are associated with an event or a particular person or place. Those are the things that I think of as significant. And I'm just kind of wondering how this kind of significant status came to be.
Chair, Member Guida, with reference to is this the reference to the current staff recommendation or what happened in 2012?
In 2012, and yeah.
Well, I might defer to a member of the public if he chooses to speak about the 2012 record.
Right.
All I have is are the minutes.
Yes.
And so
We have some resources in this room.
yeah,
Yes.
we may have some resources.
Okay.
So,
Thanks,
but with
Heather.
reference to why staff wants the significant status to be retained, and staff's going to be making this recommendation for all 4 buildings, is because it does speak to the impact of urban renewal, and it does speak to our evolution as a community. And so while you might say, oh, if this were on Don Cubero in Don Gaspar, in the Don Gaspar Historic District, maybe I wouldn't consider it contributing. I would not consider it significant. It may be contributing, but the line of thought there is it's part of an urban fabric that's really an important part of the story of the city of Santa Fe and the state complex.
Great. Thank you.
Member Mevinu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, I just follow up on this idea of significance in this particular case because it does trouble me. I think that our definition, it's always struck me as being hopelessly ambiguous because it, as you know, first it says it needs to be historic, then it says, and it needs to embody distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, period. That's the first definition. But then it goes on to say, for it to be designated as significant, it must retain a high level of historic integrity. So now a new condition. But then the complication gets to the next part where it says, for a structure may be designated as significant. And now we have some really specific concepts being thrown in here, which is number 1, for its association with events or persons that are important, or B, if it's listed on or eligible to be listed on the state or national registries. And the big question is, are those additional ways a structure could be significant, or are those also conditions that need to be met in order to be significant? And I tend to be in the latter camp because I think that otherwise, if you only stop at the very first sentence, it embodies distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. Everything we designate as contributing almost everything would qualify under that standard. It becomes very difficult to say, well, what's the difference then? Because everything we think contributes embodies distinctive characteristics. So I think that to be significant, my view of what is intended here is that the distinction intended to be drawn is between individual structures that are independently significant or important, let's say, regardless of their context. That's where they are. They happen to be in this district, or they could be outside the district and be a landmark. But that specific structure is significant and important for these reasons set forth. And usually it's because of the 2 that are called out, the association with events and persons, or it's eligible under the registries. And I think if you don't have those, you really have no way of drawing a line between contributing and significant. And to me, the contributing structures, the point there is that they don't need to be independently important. In fact, they could be, as we've talked about, very humble vernacular structures, but they contribute to the fabric of the district. And I think that's the key distinction between these 2 concepts. And so when I look at this, I think at best, I would say contributing, because I don't see anything about any of these buildings that would qualify as highly important, even if it was outside the district for any of the reasons set forth here. And even contributing, I think, is difficult because again, as we were talking about before, that particular area has changed so much that these have been sort of orphaned and left behind and no longer seem to be harmonizing with the actual neighborhood and streetscape that they're in. So I don't know if you have any, I'm just kind of giving my view of the difference between significant and contributing and non-contributing. But I guess I'd make one more point before I turn it over to you to see if you have any thoughts on that. And that is, to the extent they're contributing at all, let alone significant, I think the importance would be what you identified as they're representative of something that existed in Santa Fe that was then taken away through urban renewal. But then I would say you have to keep the garages, because that would be the whole significance of these structures, is they were built at a time when everyone needed a garage because the automobile had infiltrated the city. And so I think if you take away the garages, they literally have no meaning at all, in my mind. So any thoughts on any of those observations?
Wow, that was a lot.
Sorry.
Area.
And you don't have to. It's fine if you don't. I mean,
Oh, no,
I'm ready to go on
actually,
the spot.
I really appreciate your points. Chair Rios, member Bienvenue, I think there was a lot of value in that discussion, and significant has a higher test. You're absolutely correct. And one of those tests, of course, is the integrity, historic integrity. This really hasn't been changed at all. But you know, those events and urban renewal, I would consider as an event, a part of the, you know, the history, or a picture of the history of Santa Fe that really disrupted the urban fabric of Santa Fe, disrupted what was, you know, previously here, and buried several different layers of and generations of development that was in that area, potentially even speaking to systemic racism in choosing that area because of the Barrio de Analco not being considered as valuable as other places. So that, I think, is an important thing to remember relative to seeing those fragments. And we do have that fragment, and I think the community values a lot in the Barrio de Analco of that one street on West of Vargas and East of Vargas. So it's, in the opinion of staff, that is the reason, and maybe I'm looking at it more holistically, that these buildings should be designated as significant. And you bring up a very good point with reference to the garages, because yes, the vehicle was starting to have more dominance in the way we lived. So, but I was looking at that more individually, I guess, for its own architectural merits. So you bring a good point to the board.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Member Berkeley.
Chair Rios, I just wanted to, I was going to actually say almost exactly what you said, which is the event, to my mind, is the urban renewal experience. And also the event, the whole purpose for why those houses were built in the first place was for the people who lived in that area and maybe worked at the Capitol in that area. And I actually disagree about the garages. I see the garages and the houses as one. Yeah, so I agree with you that they ought to be seen on the same level.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if it would be helpful, I did find some places from the staff report and the minutes from 2012 that describes staff's recommendation. The staff actually recommended a downgrade on the 4 casitas from significant to contributing, but wrote, for example, 402 Don Gaspar Avenue is a duplex residential structure. Gives a description of it, but it goes on to read this: these structures are listed as contributing to the district, and the distinctive character may be found on the north and east elevations there as on the east elevation of the garage. These structures are not listed on the state or national registers, but they are eligible under criterion C. And the eligibility under criterion C applies to all 4 of the casita structures. And criterion C of the National Register of Historic Places, National Register criteria for evaluation. Subsection C reads, a structure that embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. And then I also found on, and that's on page 170 of the packet for 402 Don Gaspar. And then I also found I was on page 162, where the is Dr. Kantner. Let's see. Move to designate the house at 402 Don Gaspar as a significant structure as it meets all criteria, including its location, its age, the fact that it embodied distinctive characteristics, which meant distinguishing characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, and maintains a high level of integrity and, as recommended by staff, met criterion B of the city code, would suggest that it should be eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So apparently that's city code, not the criteria for placement on the National Register. So I'm not clear whether that the recommendation was significant or contributing, but that was the way that that motion was cast, and similar motions with respect to all 4 of these casitas. If you want to review those are at pages 165 and I believe 170 of the packet for 402 Don Gaspar.
Thank you, Frank. Anything further?
Further, thank you.
So Ms. Jenkins, were you going to come up?
Thank you, Chair Rios and board members. So it's important to reiterate and notice a recurring theme is how much these casitas relate to the Don Gaspar Area Historic District. We keep hearing that over and over. Again, I don't think there's any argument there that that is what they relate to. But we're not in that district. The standards before you relate to the district we're in. Feeling a bit like a broken record. So there is, so there's acknowledgement, but yeah, if we were in the Don Gaspar district, this would probably be a very different conversation, but we're not. We are not. And so I'm just inviting us to just remember the lens through which the ordinance mandates deliberations occur and positive findings with respect to this district that these buildings are in. And that is what is critical to that's what's critical to the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. As Member Bienvenue indicated earlier, in this district and throughout the city of Santa Fe, there are buildings that are not in harmony with the district. Look at the cathedral. Look at other buildings within the downtown area that are not in harmony. In my view, these buildings obviously tell a story. This is a trail. This is like something that you want to, in my view, preserve because they are telling a story of the past. They are saying, look what was here before. I remember when urban removal happened and there was no Paseo de Peralta and there were all these little homes in the area that were removed here and all the way through, like St. Francis. There was no St. Francis. That was part of urban removal. And they removed the small buildings, the family homes. People lived in those homes and they removed those homes. These are a representation, a trail of what was there. And what is preservation if not to keep what is there? It's a history. Is it the most gorgeous building? Are these buildings the most gorgeous buildings on earth? Perhaps not. But do they represent something important within the history of Santa Fe? And I say yes. And I do feel, unlike my colleague here, Member Guida, that age really, I feel that he doesn't super emphasize age. That's one of the most important things in my view, because age denotes the materials you use, the proportion of the buildings, the style of the buildings, color of the buildings. It denotes, age denotes a lot. It's not just, oh, that building is 50 years or older. It comes with something more than just 50 years. It tells you a lot about what that building is about, the history. What are we about? This city is, yes, our ordinance was established in 1959. And yes, it needs improvement, but guess what? That 1957 ordinance has worked quite well, really. They're in preserving many of the buildings that we have here in Santa Fe. Is it perfect? Heavens no, we're trying to do a rewrite now, right? And, but I would say also in the rewrite, be careful what you write, because you never know what worms might come out of that rewrite. You really have to look at something very, very carefully in terms of preserving and in terms of the ordinance and how you look at a building, really. And really what you value, because you may value this, but I may value this because of you value what you have because of your own history. Right? That's what I think. So, in reference to this particular building, is there anything further that anybody wants to say at this time?
Madam Chair, just a few thoughts about the casitas. I don't necessarily agree that everything is important because it's old. I think the cathedral is a great example of something that's exceptional. With regard to the definition of significant structure, I agree with Member Benvenu that the first part of the definition is problematic. Distinctive characteristics of a type, a period, or method of construction, that encompasses a lot of buildings. Any idea that these buildings are befitting a significant structure designation to me is kind of outrageous. We have to, I think the measure of significant structures, are the criteria that follow the association with events or persons that are important on a local, regional, or national, global level, or is eligible to be listed on the state register or the national register. I don't see these buildings in any way meeting that standard on their own, or even if they were in a context that they contributed to. These buildings simply are not significant. The next level down on contributing, I recognize that the district has changed. I recognize that the downtown and East Side Historic District is heterogeneous. These buildings are, quite obviously out of place and out of time. They no longer meet the standard as defined in the code, as even though they're not unique in itself, that they're adding to the historic associations or historic architectural design qualities that are significant for a district. I don't believe that, if they were part of the Don Gaspar district, maybe, but if that would require them being moved across a major thoroughfare. I don't either buy the discussion about urban renewal. I think that the insertion of these roads in Santa Fe is separate from the development of the Capitol complex. This is a part of town that was developed as the Capitol complex over time. Yes, that's supplanted other things, but it's not a record per se of urban renewal. And we're already stretching our non-existent statements of significance for the downtown and east side historic district by talking about a capital area that is recognizable. Having just this kind of little remnant is problematic to me, is emblematic of that. I would need a study to really understand how this set of buildings really embodies a record of urban renewal. I think that the other issue here is that, and I said this before, it's not, historic preservation is not archaeology. Not, we don't save everything in hopes of yielding more information one day. Everything is not of equal importance. We live in a city that has to change over time. More progressive and current arguments in historic preservation are weighing the benefit, the value of historic preservation against housing members of our community who are presently unhoused, right? Should we save every last building or use preservation as a weapon to prevent the development of smarter, denser infill development? That's an important debate. And that debate hinges on the idea that we don't look at historic preservation of buildings as a science, but rather as a kind of evolving field that recognizes the values of a community as they change over time. Yes, history is important, but the present is equally important. And I can't see trapping these buildings in amber when they're so disconnected from the district that they were once a part of. That district does not exist anymore. And when this is so out of line with how even our flawed code is written. So to me, at best, best at worst, these are non-contributing buildings. That's all I have.
Roberta?
I'd just like to mention one more thing is I was on the field trip today. So I was standing with the buildings in person as a human, not just looking at them on a screen. And I was seeing houses over here and houses over there and houses over there, like houses, homes that people live in. So I actually don't feel they're that disconnected from where they are. Just want to make this statement.
Sure.
So Heather, you're going to go through all of the cases and then I'm going to ask for public comment at the very end. Is that the way it's going to work?
Rios, actually, the preference is that we talk about this particular one.
And ask for public comment at this point?
Public comment per building.
Okay. So public comment, please. If anybody's interested, please come to the podium. You can line up and you can all get sworn in at the same time if you haven't gotten sworn in, and then state your name.
Okay, I will swear both of you in. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimonies you're about to give are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure, thank you.
My name's Elizabeth West, and I live in the South Capitol area, 318 Senna Street. This is really interesting, and I really am glad to be here. I knew it was going to be fun. When we talk about exceptional buildings, what that means is for some people, oh, it's a really terrific building. For others of us, it means it's out of the ordinary and a little less of a judgment about whether or not it's a great building. And that certainly applies, in my opinion, to many of Kruger's works. With these buildings that we're going to be addressing or listening to you all address tonight, taking this first one, I find it very interesting. The conundrum of separating something out when something is a part of something. And Mr. Guida, you definitely addressed that, as have others, and I appreciate that. So the complexity is jiggling around in my mind. That makes it a little difficult. However, I happen to like ambiguity, and I think ambiguity permits acknowledgement of our developing history. And the chair made some good comments about that. They can sound sometimes emotional or dramatic or personal. None of those, by the way, is a bad thing. But we being very real about our history and the construction of our architectural city, I think the ambiguity, and I would address this to Mr. Bienvenu, permits looking at our history in relation to stories, into relation to how things have developed. Some buildings have become more important. Oh, well, hello. Is that
Elizabeth,
anyway,
go
I'll make
ahead
it
and
really
finish your
fast. Some
thought.
buildings have developed into something more important because they are remaining. That's another term. That's another part of exceptional. They're exceptional because they've survived. Then flux. Nobody said that word, but I'll bring it up. Flux, by its nature, this changing stuff, is difficult to pinpoint. It's a challenge for you all, and we have an opportunity because ambiguity gives us the chance to save our history. Talk to me later if you want more.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Adam Johnson, 121 Arroyo Hondo Trail. So I guess I'll build on Ms. West's comments. Instead of ambiguity, I would maybe use the word nuance. And I think that when we talk about the boundaries of the historic districts, right, they're actually interconnected. There's a line that's been drawn somewhere on a map, and to make a sort of stark distinction between the Don Gaspar Historic District and the downtown and east side, which is, as mentioned multiple times, a heterogeneous district, we need to consider the remnants or the sort of ways that they interpenetrate one another. And in fact, Member Guida mentioned that they are little remnants, and I think that's actually a good reason to consider them about a part of the story of Santa Fe's development. And so I think that we should consider that when we are in this debate. I also agree that it's a quite interesting discussion about, the status and what is a significant building. And I think it's important that we air these out. Thank you.
I've previously been sworn in, Randall Bell. I really appreciate the chair's comments. I think I agree strongly with those, as well as Ms. Lamboy's comments. The question of what the recommendation was back then is sort of beside the point. The fact is, the board at that time established the status of these buildings, and they did so in a way that has really not shown any change since then. That particular part of the Capitol campus is basically identical to the way it was in 2012, with the exception of the nearby parking structure that was created. There are residences, historic residences, within a block on Galisteo Street. There are a number of historic residences there on Galisteo Street. a stone's throw away. There are historic residences just a stone's throw across the Paseo. There are historic residences along the Barrio de Nalco, very close by. It is not necessary that historic structures be in a completely contiguous, bound up development. These structures have not really been altered at all. I went through them 10 years ago when the state was proposing to do something, build an office building in that same general area, and they are completely intact, if not well maintained. So I would urge the board to maintain the current existing status. Thank you.
Mr. Bell.
I'll swear both of you in at the same time. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimonies you're about to give are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
John Penn Lafarge, 647 Old Santa Fe Trail. If I understood Heather Lamboy correctly, she talked about the significance of a building possibly being beyond its district, but belonging to the person or an event who lived there or took place there, or even to the city, the state, the nation, or the globe, if I understood that correctly. Now, I'm not going to make a case for this being globally significant, but I will say that all these structures have character and integrity, and that integrity has been carefully preserved, and it's important. They also are integral on the inside, as I've been on the inside and seen them, and they have integrity there. Now, this is important because in 2018, we were selected from the entire globe by the National Geographic Society for our sense of place. Every time a structure of character and integrity is torn down or its designation changed so it can be torn down, our sense of integrity and our sense of place is damaged. And if we believe in our town and we believe in what we stand for and what makes us, us as distinguished from any other place in the United States, that sense of place must be maintained. And I urge you to maintain our sense of place by maintaining the status of these integral houses with great character. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lafarge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I'm Tom Spray. My address is 444 Galisteo Street, directly across from these casitas. I also want to urge you to make no change to what your counterparts did in 2012. I speak to you as a veteran of that time. At that time, I was the president of the Old Santa Fe Association. This other issue came up, and there was the discussion with the state of also being able to deal with these structures and may perhaps demolish them. At that time, Wilson and Company was involved. Now someone else is involved in leading the charge for this. Nothing has changed in that time, as the previous speakers said. I think your predecessors did a great job, very thorough in terms of what their analysis of what these structures meant and what they mean to the neighborhood. So I would urge you to keep them exactly as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, board members, I spoke earlier. My name is John Eddy. I very much appreciate staff's work on this project. One point I'd like to make, which is difficult for you folks because you're not doing it the way that I would like you to be doing it. But the point I'd like to make is that these casitas cannot be considered in isolation from each other. They are of a piece. The four of them go together. As they remain, they are the last vestige or bridge between the Analco and the De Vargas district. That's where their importance lies. Because they are there, they can still tell the story of the transition of the native and Hispanic inhabitants of the Analco and the predominantly Anglo neighborhoods to the south in the De Vargas, or sorry, Dungas district. They still have the integrity that they have had for all these decades, despite the fact that the ownership of these properties has been practicing willful neglect and demolition by neglect on some of them, which I find pretty atrocious. I think they're counting on them being demolished, and they're not going to make them look like they should be worth saving. So it's the elephant in the room. I urge you to maintain significant status on this structure, as well as extending it to the rest of the structures that will be discussed going forward. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think you know I tried so hard to change the downtown and East Side Historic District into the downtown district and the historic East Side District because they are different. But you also remember that I was the staff member for this project, even when the proposal to add to these structures and leave them as facadectomies on that street, I was also the staff member then. But I want to caution you about your motions because you kind of handicapped the applicant on the first case without designating primary elevations for the contributing Concha building. So that sets that process back, unfortunately. But see, staff recommended non-contributing, so that effort to say what would be primary wasn't performed. And so now you have that dilemma where you don't have a full hearing on that case. So in this case, with significant contributing, the code doesn't say that all elevations on a significant building are primary. That was administrative gloss that we applied to help us with casework. So significant, when I was here for 15 years, meant all elevations are primary and cannot be changed. That's why I did not recommend that status. But when you look at the streetscape in Harmony, Madam Chair, this is a linear streetscape, 600 feet, both directions on both sides of the street. And when you look at streetscape, historic boundaries do not stop a streetscape. So this streetscape is part of the Don Gaspar streetscape south of Paseo de Peralta. It is the same streetscape. That's where the Harmony is. But these buildings, even if they were in the Don Gaspar Historic District, are they significant? No, they're common houses. But I also alerted you at the time to the car house. Just like today, you get a break on your insurance if your car house is a separate structure from your people house. That's why car houses are so important to preserve for status and for integrity. But significant, old with high integrity are all that's required. The other things are, and you could also use these other issues. Here we have old and high integrity. I still didn't recommend significant. But if you downgrade to contributing, please assign primary elevations to not hamper the applicant. But I was your applicant, your staff for that. So if you have any other questions about my recommendations.
David?
Yeah, I think I may have recommended contributing for all of them with primary elevations. Maybe one of them, but they're all pretty similar. They're not fabulous, significant buildings. And I was willing to let them go for that facadectomy into a larger structure that was attached to the back of them. The one slide we saw, that back elevation, there's nothing wonderful about that elevation. It doesn't face the street. It doesn't deserve primary elevation. But the car houses are important. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom?
Yes, Chair Rios. Richard Martinez is first to speak. He's previously sworn.
Hello, Richard Martinez here. I want to make 3 points. One, these houses are out of context. They are surrounded by state buildings. There's state buildings on the north, on the south, on the east, and on the west. they're not a great example or consequence of urban renewal, because urban renewal had a very difficult relationship with other cities. I would say that this is not that situation, and to make an argument that this is a monument to urban renewal is a problem, and is denigrating what urban renewal did to many of the cities. I would also urge that these be downgraded to non-contributing, because I think that this would be a great opportunity for us, for our generation, to contribute to this city. And let's see what beautiful thing we can do with this site it speaks of the now and what is possible. I think we could do very great things rather than preserve things in amber. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Stephanie, we can hear you, and speak loudly because I think the back can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think I muted myself. Stephanie Beninatto, I've been previously sworn. I'm not sure that this building, I would like this building to be significant, but I'm not sure that it is. I do think, however, it is definitely contributing. And I do think it makes a transition into the Don Gaspar neighborhood. Those buildings represent a time in Santa Fe when, oh my gosh, you could actually afford to live in the downtown. And I know people who rented houses, one of those little casitas right across that you're talking about. They were a new family, new baby, and yet they could afford to live there. That's what these houses are telling us about. They're telling us about a history where we actually had organic mixed use in the downtown, which we don't have now, but we'd like to recreate at great cost. And to say somehow that a 200,000 square foot office building somehow is better than preserving these buildings that tell us a history of what the use was like and what happened in downtown, in my opinion, doesn't even equate. It's not about, preservation in face of wanting more housing. It's preservation in face of wanting more office space that the state already has too much of. So I'm suggesting perhaps a downgrade to contributing. And I do want to just say about significance, it always has been my understanding that the 4 facades have to be virtually unchanged. And then the may language is permissive, not mandatory. So you may consider it depending on the association with person, event, etc. Or if it could be nominated. And I think we heard Mr. Rubalid say that in 2012, at least at that point, they did consider that it could have been nominated. So, I mean, if you want to hang your hat on that, I guess you could and keep it significant. I would suggest if you downgrade it to contributing to please designate the primary facades. And I would ask that you reopen the case on 130 South Capitol. I think that's the right address. The Concha Ortiz y Pino building, because you did not designate primary facades just now. And I do think that you have to do that as part of the status upgrade. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom?
No, Chair Rios.
And in reference to, I don't know what direction the board is going to take, but in reference to primary facades? Do that this evening.
Chair Rios, Mr. Rash made a good point. I think what we'd have to do is reopen the hearing for 130 South Capitol in order to designate primary facades. So we might want to do that at the end of the.
Because it's not advertised as such.
Yeah, and if it's the pleasure of the board, and if it's decided that these be consider contributing. I subscribe to, if it's significant all facades, then need to be considered as primary. But if the board wants to designate facades, even if it's significant or if it's contributing, the board certainly has rights to do so. And
can do that this
because we're
evening?
considering status, part and parcel of that would be primary facades. So
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Member Benvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's a good point. The last time we upgraded to contributing, we designated primary facades at the last meeting we had. So clearly, I don't think it's required, but it's clearly good practice and it would be vastly preferable for the applicant. So I do think that was an oversight that we can correct on the prior case. On the case in front of us, what would be staff's recommendation as to primary facades in the event that it was contributing?
Chair Rios, Member Bienvenu. So I think the two street facades are important. The relationship of that building to the street is important. And so that would be the north elevation and the east elevation.
Okay. Somebody ready to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion. Yes, Berkeley.
Member Berkeley.
So if I'm understanding, we're going to just do this for every single house?
Right.
Okay.
A motion for every.
Okay, so for case 2023-006703 HDRB, I would like to recommend that it be designated as contributing and that its garage be retained as designated contributing and that the north and east side be designated the primary facades.
Is there a second to this motion?
I second with a proposed friendly amendment that the east facade of the garage be designated primary.
Yes, I would accept that, yes.
So we have that motion that is pretty clear. Anybody else wanting to add anything else? If not, roll call vote, please.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Bienvenu,
Yes.
Member Guida,
No.
Member Aguilar Medrano.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. We move on to the next case, which is located at 406 Don Gaspar. Heather, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Rios. One moment, let me pull up my PowerPoint. Right, moving on to the next house in that line of houses, which is 406 Don Gaspar. There we go. So the houses that were built, these three identical footprint bungalows that were built between 1921 and 1930, according to the Sanborn map. It appears that they were built from south to north. So the furthest most south bungalow is the oldest one, but they were pretty much built in generally the same time. So the bungalows are all constructed of pin tile according to the Sanborn maps, which represents a construction technique that was introduced to Santa Fe about that time, with the penitentiary producing these building materials, and it is of the Spanish Pueblo revival style. And as I mentioned in my earlier presentation, it represents a Spanish Pueblo revival style house that is distinct from the other two houses. And the windows are historic. You can see the typical bungalow organization of the interior space, with the fireplace being flanked on both sides by smaller windows. And also you will make note that this south elevation includes a porch. And that is one of the features that is changed as the different styles are being interpreted in the other two houses. So this one has a lintel as well as corbels that actually cover that space and serves as not only that secondary access from the garage, but also serves as a seating area in addition to that east elevation seating area. Staff recommends that it remains significant, as was determined in 2012. However, staff also would like to make a recommendation on primary facades if it's the pleasure of the board to do so, and that would be the east elevation and the south elevation. Amongst all these houses, the south elevation is what varies according to style, and so I think that would be appropriate in this particular case. And once again, staff does not recommend a contributing status for the garages, although staff sees the point of the board and understands and possibly would reconsider a recommendation with further research. So that concludes the staff presentation for 406 Don Gaspar.
Any questions? Yes.
Madam Chair, just a procedural request. Given that the conversation is likely going to be the same for all 4 of these houses, would it be okay if staff continued and presented staff reports for the other 2 so that we could make one motion on, or make motions for all three remaining cases at once and have one public comment and all that?
That actually makes sense to me. Would you be agreeable to that, Heather?
Well, I see Frank wants to speak.
Yes, Frank.
There's no reason that we can't go through all the presentations so long as there's a separate motion
Yes.
for each property
Okay.
and a separate vote.
Right.
Chair Rios, I think that's fine. It's just if there are comments from the public, if there is discussion on a specific structure, make sure they identify which one. That would be my only concern. So continuing on to 410 Don Gaspar, this building was designed in the territorial revival style, which includes a porch, the pedimented with the pedimented columns, as well as a territorial revival style accents over the windows. The windows are all wooden windows and have not been replaced. And pointing to that south elevation of this particular house, you can't see the door that's there, but it is there. But this is more of a functional entryway and not intended to be an outdoor seating or an additional amenity like it was in the previous elevation or the previous 406 Don Gaspar building. And you can see the garage and how it relates to in this picture. And with reference to the recommendations of this particular property, staff retains a recommendation of significance for the building, but if the board were to consider primary facades, the primary facade should be the east and south elevation, and then the east elevation of the garage. That concludes that presentation for 410 Don Gaspar. And the last building, 414 Don Gaspar, was the first building that was built in the territorial revival style of Pentile construction. It also has that same footprint. And you can see that once again, it's more utilitarian in nature. And in fact, this is a more simplified territorial revival style in that it does not have the porch similar to the building to the north. There's it just is an entrance and no sort of outdoor amenity space. And just to provide you with sort of a glimpse of what all 3 houses look like at the rear, they're all identical, but reflective of their individual styles. So I just wanted to point that out as to reinforcing that this was a footprint of, this was a same building repeated over each building, but also interpreted with different styles. So with reference to that significant designation, staff still retains that recommendation. And if the board were to designate primary facades once against the east and the south elevations and the east elevation of the garage, with the recommendation of non-contributing for the garage standing as well. That concludes the staff presentation.
Any questions for staff? Questions, Ms. Jenkins? She has nothing more to add? Anyone from the public that has been sworn in or wishes to speak, even if you haven't been sworn in, come on down. And please identify which building you're speaking about or all buildings,
Yes, Madam Chair, this is David Rash, speaking about all.
the rest of
Six.
them.
There are 6 in this one, garages on each one.
6
One-
buildings, yeah, 3.
I'm talking about all 6. You know what's truly unbelievable? The historic code doesn't use the phrases Pueblo Spanish revival, Pueblo Spanish territorial revival. The code doesn't even use those terms. It uses old Santa Fe style and recent Santa Fe style. And if you read John Gaume, 1975, that is the modern movement of recent Santa Fe style. These are pen tile buildings. They look like adobe buildings. They are exactly the example of recent Santa Fe style in Pueblo Spanish revival and territorial revival. Excellent examples. But again, I didn't recommend significant for any of them. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Good evening again, Tom Spray. I want to urge you also to adopt all the staff recommendations on all these 6 structures, which we just talked about. A little bit of history from the last time we did this in 2012. The effort by the state at that point was to put a 60,000 square foot office building on the area where these casitas are, including the empty parking lot right now. At that time, we said for Old Santa Fe Association, we are not against an office building, the finance building, the state. We are not against that building. We are not against that. And we asked an architect to do a massing study to see if we could fit 60,000 square foot building on that space as it was right now. And we did, projected it right on that screen right there 10 years ago. And we showed that at that time, what was possible. So the fact that we could do that and still be able to have an exceptional office building and be able to get the state of New Mexico to win awards for preservation of those 4 things, everybody was going to win. And that's what we suggested at that time. As I said, your predecessors voted as they did right there to maintain these buildings as they were. And I urge you to again to adopt what the staff has recommended to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, board members, John Eddy speaking again. I would urge you to accept staff's recommendation as these buildings, all 6 of them being significant. But the fact that the first building was statused as contributing in a certain way, I feel that, I hate to say it, but it locks you into trying to be consistent with these other buildings. These are 4 very related buildings, just like 4 children born of a mother at the same time. Is that quadruplets? Quadruplets, I believe. That's what you've got here. So I think these buildings need to be treated consistently, and you've already set a precedent. So unfortunately, I would have preferred that had been significant, but there we are. So thank you. And again, because they are not to be considered in isolation, they need to be considered as a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eddy.
Adam Johnson, I've been sworn. I have a kind of question that I think builds on Mr. Eddy's comment, which is, I think these are really interesting when you see them one by one by one, because they have different stylistic features, but have the same footprint throughout. So I wonder if how a significant status might play into that, in that they sort of resonate within one another, right? They are of a piece, as Mr. Eddy stated. So I wonder if that is something worth consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else within this building? I'll move on to Zoom. Anybody on Zoom?
Yes, Stephanie Benedetto would like to speak. Stephanie, you may unmute.
Thank you. Stephanie Benedetto. I would like to have you follow staff's recommendations for significant building status on the casitas and contributing actually for the garages. And I think these are different than the duplex in that they were built at a different time period by seemingly a different person. And I think they are different in that when you look at the back side with the windows, it's characteristic of a time period where you have a lot of different heights on the windows, and they all had that. And so in this case, I think that you could designate the back as a primary facade, whereas on the duplex, I didn't think that back wall merited that. And again, I just want to say that I think it's important to preserve this part of the downtown's history because people lived in the downtown. It was organic, integral town. You didn't just have a merchant retail space and then people lived far away. Until 1940, everybody lived within 2 miles of the downtown. I know people who lived in apartments on San Francisco Street in the 100 block of West San Francisco Street. I know people who lived at the Inn of the Five Graces, the stone building there. I know people who lived in these little casitas. So there were people, and I know people who lived right near where Vanessi's is now too, as well as other places. So downtown had a lot of people, residents, people who were working as artists or working in hospitality, able to live in downtown. And I think that's important in terms of preserving these buildings and giving them a status that will help preserve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Anyone else?
No, Chair Rios.
Thank you very much. Okay, board members, I will entertain a motion on 406 Don Gaspar.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment before we go into a motion? Thank you. So I'm really troubled by the development for these 4 properties being designated likely contributing. The reason I brought up the 2012 case tonight is because I feel like those designations, particularly the significant designation, was made not out of good preservation practice, but out of fear of development, right? That inability for us to separate potential development from an objective review of historic status of assets within the city. And I feel that the votes tonight and the comments tonight are motivated by the same fear that change will happen, there will be new construction, we won't like it, and we prefer what's here now. And we'll go to great lengths to make a justification for preservation, perhaps where none really exists, or just because our city ordinance is ambiguous. I like that word. It opens up a lot of space for a certain segment of our population to voice and use the ordinance for that end and to prevent development. And yes, in this case, it's for a state office building, but in other instances, it is for other things that our city needs. I'll point out that the ordinance, or actually all of the efforts of the Santa Fe style since 1912, certainly with the ordinance through the 1990s, was about design. It wasn't a historic preservation ordinance. It was a historical styles movement in terms of establishing a regional style that coincided with statehood, and a style control exercise that was about design, about placemaking, about creating a unique place and identity for Santa Fe. And I would agree with some members of the public who stated that that is the reason why Santa Fe is unique. That is because of good urban design, good stylistic design that was formulated here. When I look at this, and I'm on the ground, and I've spent time here at the site, when I look at it from the aerial, when I look at it from moving through that district in a car or by foot, I am confounded on that design front. We have a giant ceremonial axis that extends from the roundhouse and that just dies into these four buildings. It's silly. In any other context of discussing good urban design, good campus design, this is a ridiculous move. I really am frustrated when this aspect of supposed historic preservation is being used and weaponized in Santa Fe and is at odds with good design. It is at odds with the thing that we set out to do, the thing that we did so successfully through the 1990s. This is a big problem, and I certainly don't support any kind of twisted argument about the historic status of these structures. This seems very misguided to me. That's all I'll say.
Any other comments? I do have to say that I sat on the board in 2012, and not that my memory is that sharp from all those years back, but I believe that we did have, we obviously did have discussion, and those board members at that time, including myself, I was not the chair at the time, did feel that these buildings should be significant, and you'd have to interview or talk to those board members at the time, but I felt that they were doing this from a preservation standpoint and not from a quote unquote weaponized tactic. But anyway, I will entertain a motion on 406 Don Gaspar. Member Berkeley, it looks like you're getting ready to do that.
And so I would like to say for the record that I am not making these motions because I'm afraid of the building potential that's there. I had no idea what's being thought about there. So just for the record, I think you're mischaracterizing some of the people's intentions here. So I want to make clear mine is not to be nice. And I would say that if I could have, if these were presented as all four as one piece and there were, I would consider it primary for sure, but they're being presented one at a time. And so I would say for 406, case 2023006704-HDRB, to designate it contributing, to designate the garage, also retain it as contributing with east and south as primary elevations.
East and south of the house.
Yes.
Is there a second to this motion?
A second, and also I would assume the east facade of the garage is primary.
Yes, sorry, I left out the garage.
Anything further? Roll call vote, please.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
No.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to 410. Don Gaspar. We did ask for public comment for all of them, so I'm going to assume that that was already done. So I will entertain a motion for 410 Don Gaspar.
In case number 2023006705 HDRB 410 Don Gaspar Avenue, I would move to downgrade the status of the main building to contributing, maintain the garage status as contributing, and designate the primary facade of the main building as east and south, and of the garage as the east facade.
A second.
Berkeley seconds.
Anything further to add? Nothing further. Roll call vote, please.
Member Guida,
No.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue. The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. And the last case is 414 Don Gaspar. Motion, please.
I'll make a motion for case 2023006706 HDRB to downgrade it, the status to contributing and retain the garage status as contributing, with the east and south of the main house being primary and the east of the garage being primary.
I hear a second.
Aguilar Madrona seconds.
Anything further to add? Roll call vote, please.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
No.
Member Aguilar Madrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone that participated in this case, in particular, those of you who came out from the public, whether you spoke in favor or opposed to the project. I do appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yes, Ms.
Thank you,
Jenkins.
Chair Rios. So I think we're going to revisit the primary facades for 130. And if I may also ask, could we get a confirmation that the yard walls on 128 would also have a non-contributing designation? Would that be appropriate to clarify that in the record?
Chair Rios, with reference to the yard wall, I did not include an analysis in my staff report, so.
Can you
although,
include that when we address the primary facades for the Concha Ortiz building?
Pardon me, just one moment. The yard walls now. All right, so I was confirming that would not be an issue relative to notice and not being specifically spelled out in the caption. So, and it's the opinion of the attorney that's not. So certainly I can address that as part of our discussion primary.
All righty, discussion items, anything under discussion items?
With reference to 130 South Capitol, does the board not want to reopen the case, or do you want to reopen the case?
Oh, okay.
Do we need to have a vote to reopen the case?
Pardon?
I think somebody needs to make a motion to reopen the case.
Maybe.
Bienvenue moves to reopen case 2023-006709 HDRB 130 South Capitol Street for the purpose of designating primary facades.
Wait a second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Madrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley, Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
I'm pulling up my presentation
Mhm.
for that so we can look at some pictures. For reference with our discussion. I'm sorry, just one moment. All right, with reference to primary facades, now that the building has been designated contributing by the board, it is the opinion of staff that the elevation that faces South Capitol Street, which is the primary entry to the building, should be considered as primary. And then moving around the building. This is not. There we go. Fell asleep on me. The courtyard, as it was originally designed and contemplated, was an important feature as outlined in the drawings. And I'm looking for a plan view, but staff recommends that elevation be considered as contributing, and that would be the, I believe, west elevation. You can see the courtyard here in the plan view. And I'll go back to the pictures as soon as my computer responds to me.
And Heather, the other facade, is that north elevation?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that is the north elevation, and then the portion of the west elevation that immediately is adjacent to the street is not much to write home about. But if you continue to around the building, this is where the courtyard, this was intended to be sort of an outdoor amenity for the workers at that space. And with reference to a yard wall, there is a yard wall that is abutting the parking. Sorry, I'm flipping through these so quickly. Abutting the parking area. And that is sort of a stylistic modern, common to the modern movement design for walls. And so staff would also recommend that that yard wall be designated as primary and control.
Yes, I agree.
Madam Chair, just for Heather to clarify, staff is recommending the entirety of the north facade,
Right.
the west courtyard facing elevation,
Yes, that's correct.
and the entirety of the courtyard yard wall.
That encloses that courtyard. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you for clarifying.
So anything else? Alrighty,
Thank you, Chair Rios. So, so with respect to 130 and Concha Ortiz, that all sounds great. But I think there are also some yard walls that are associated with 128 with respect to
will-
the motor pool. So we're going to get to that. Okay, I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
thank you. So, yes, I have to ask for public comment. Anybody from the public wishing to speak? Mr. Rash.
Madam Chair, the Concha building, the modernist quality of it that exceeds the territorial quality of it is not preserved with one facade. And the east facade and the west facade are so minimally fenestrated as to create this massive two ends on a highly window dominated north and south and east facade on the interior courtyard. Character defining features on this building are not just the fenestrated facades, they're east and or west as well, because they're significantly different and give a different quality to that building than if the north facade were mimicked on the west and east facade. That would be a very different building. Thank you.
So David, before you leave, so you're indicating that we should include the west.
I think the east is even better than the west because that small building obscures
We
it.
had indicated north and west and the yard wall,
Oh.
and you're indicating the east.
I would say east and north of the main building. I don't know about the interior courtyard, but in my recommendation, I would say either east or west of that massive facades on those two sides is character defining to this building. It's not just the fenestrations.
Thank you. Heather.
Just a quick question. So the east elevation is this elevation that's to the left of the flagpole. Is that correct? Because that's the east elevation.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to be sure. Thank you.
Mr. Eddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I just wanted to agree with Mr. Rash wholeheartedly. I think the massing of this building is very, very important. And disregarding these facades that have been brought up would be to ignore that massing and jeopardize the character of that building. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom?
Chair Rios, no, nobody on Zoom would like to
Okay,
speak.
thank you. Motion, please.
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
Member Guida.
So I believe this is case 2023-006-709 HDRB 130 South Capitol Street. We've reopened. The motion would be to add to the board's previous designation of the building as contributing the following primary elevations. The north elevation, finding that it adequately conveys the shifted massing and fenestration and entry of the building. The west courtyard facing elevation, because of its designed features and its relationship to the designed courtyard, and the entirety of the courtyard enclosing yard wall as primary.
Is there a second to this motion? Somebody.
Let me ask, is it okay to ask a question? I'm curious what are you deliberately not including the east elevation?
Yes,
Express the opinion or the rationale.
The east elevation is unremarkable. The west elevation has vertical elements, the courtyard entry. It's a defining characteristic of the building. And I think that given the restrictions working within or near primary facades, we would be able to retain the massing and all of the character defining features of the building with those facades designated.
Is there a second to this motion?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
member Bienvenue,
Yes.
member Guida,
Yes.
member Aguilar Medrano.
No.
The motion has been approved.
Is there a motion to reopen 128 South Capitol? Don't we have to reopen it or were we?
Yes. Chair Rios, yes, just like the other case, we should reopen that if we're going to vote.
So Guido will move to reopen 2023-006708 HDRB 128 South Capitol.
Aguilar Medrano seconds.
Roll call vote.
Okay, member Bienvenue,
To clarify, the yard walls is non-contributing.
the member Bienvenue, yes. Thank you, member Guida,
Yes.
member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
and member Berkeley.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you, Chair Rios. With reference to the yard wall, and you can see here, it's in front of the late building here. This is the yard wall of which the applicant speaks, and staff is of the opinion that it's not it's not in of itself does not contribute to the character of the district. I have not had, or to the property. And I have not had, with the caveat that I have not had the opportunity to review when that wall may have been built. Obviously, since the property was built, the primary property was built in 1961, everything was done by 1969. It may be historic, but staff still remains of the opinion that it should be designated as non-contributing.
Any questions for staff? Ms. Jenkins, did you have anything to say?
Thank you, Chair Rios, board members. Our records indicate that the wall came a little later. It was probably, but it was definitely there by 1981. It's what our records indicate. But yeah, it's in that time period. So nothing more to add. Thank you.
Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this wall? No one. No one on Zoom? Oh, someone on Zoom?
One moment. If one comment that I might make is that the cutout there in the yard wall indicates a traffic or a site triangle, and those types of things weren't used prior to the 1980s. And I even, so if anything, if that was added at a later date with a renovation, that could have happened, but it would be consistent that would be a newer non-historic addition. And Stephanie Benato would like to speak. You may unmute. You're previously sworn.
Thank you. Stephanie Benato. No, I don't think it's should be contributing at all, but I'm just wondering if it was taken down, what would be visible to the public from that direction. So I hope it stays up, even though it may be non-contributing. Thank you.
Anyone else?
No, Chair Rios.
Somebody please make a motion in reference to the wall at 128. Member Guido.
I'll make a motion. So this is for case 2023-006 709 HDRB 128 South Capitol, adding to the board's previous designation of the building as non-contributing. I move that the board now clarify that the yard wall for this property is also non-contributing.
Is there a second?
Aguilar Madrano will second.
Anything further? Nothing further. Roll call vote, please.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida,
Yes.
Member Aguilar Madrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Very much. Any matters from the board? No matters from the board. Good call. Our next meeting is Tuesday, May the 23rd. And do I hear a motion to adjourn? Is
So moved.
there a second?
Aguilar Madrano seconds.
Roll call.
Member Guida,
Yes.
Member Aguilar Madrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue.
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Thank you and good night, everyone. It's 8:20. We'll see you next.